The Calarian High Command had never seen anything like it. Admiral Vex stood before the massive viewing screen, his scaled hands trembling as he watched their orbital defense stations go dark one by one. Not from weapons fire. There had been no explosions, no energy beams, no plasma bursts. They simply stopped working. "Report," he hissed through his translator, the device struggling with his species' complex vocal cords. Lieutenant Cora, her 4 eyes darting between multiple displays, looked up with confusion written across her features. "Sir, all stations are intact. No hull breaches, no system damage that we can detect. But their weapons are offline, their shields are down, and their life support systems are running at minimum power." "The humans?" "Still broadcasting on all frequencies, sir. Music, entertainment programs, news reports. Nothing threatening." Vex's jaw clicked in frustration. 3 days ago, the first human vessel had appeared at the edge of Calarian space. Not a warship, their scans confirmed it was some sort of civilian transport. When they demanded identification, the humans had responded with friendly greetings and a request for peaceful contact. The Calarians had laughed. Their empire spanned 17 star systems. Their military might had crushed a dozen species into submission. These humans with their single ship should have been vaporized the moment they'd crossed the boundary. Instead, the Calarians had decided to make an example of them, capture their vessel, study their technology, then broadcast their execution across known space as a warning to other would-be explorers. But something had gone wrong from the moment human transmissions began flooding their communication networks. "Sir," Cora's voice carried a note of panic, "I'm receiving reports from across the fleet. Our soldiers are... they're laying down their weapons." "What? Not surrendering, sir?" "They're just stopping. The reports say they no longer see the point in fighting." Admiral Vex stormed to the communication console and opened a channel to the human vessel. A face appeared on screen unremarkable by galactic standards, with pale skin, brown hair, and those strange binocular eyes that marked their species as predators. "This is Admiral Vex of the Calarian Empire," he snarled. "What have you done to my forces?" The human, a female, according to their intelligence file, smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Hello, Admiral. I'm Captain Reed. We haven't done anything to your forces. We've simply been sharing. Sharing what? Our stories. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you." Vex felt a chill run down his spine. Stories? Music, literature, films, historical accounts, personal memoirs. The accumulated cultural output of our species. We thought you might find it interesting. You're trying to destroy us with entertainment? Captain Reed's expression grew sad. "We're not trying to destroy anyone, Admiral. We're just showing you what we've learned about ourselves. About what it means to hope when everything seems hopeless. About standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. About the bonds between friends, families, and lovers that make life worth living." The Admiral's claws scraped against the console. "Lies, propaganda." "Watch for yourself," Reed said gently. "Your own people are discovering what we discovered long ago, that there are things worth more than conquest. Things worth more than power." Vex cut the transmission, but the damage was spreading. Across his fleet, across his empire, Calarian citizens were experiencing human culture for the first time. They were learning about sacrifice, about compassion, about the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply because it was right. And for the first time in their species' violent history, they were beginning to question everything they thought they knew about strength. The Nexari hegemony had ruled through information control for 3 millennia. Their vast networks of data processors and communication hubs filtered every byte of information that flowed between their subject worlds. They decided what their citizens saw, heard, and ultimately believed. Overlord Tan stood in the central processing chamber, watching streams of data flow through holographic displays like digital waterfalls. His cybernetic implants, wired directly into his brain, allowed him to process information at superhuman speeds. But today, those same implants were feeding him reports that made no sense. The corruption spreads faster than our filters can adapt, reported tech adept Mira, her own mechanical augmentations, glowing with stress indicators. We've blocked 17 million sources in the past hour alone, but new variations keep appearing. The human cultural transmissions had reached Exari space just 26 hours ago. At first, the hegemony systems had easily contained them, blocking frequencies, scrambling signals, identifying and quarantining contaminated data streams. But the humans seemed to anticipate every countermeasure. "Show me the latest," Tan commanded. A hologram materialized showing a human child, perhaps 7 years old, sitting beside what appeared to be an elderly human male. The child was reading aloud from a bound collection of papers, a primitive information storage method their xenologists had identified as a book. "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," the child read, her voice filled with wonder and excitement. Tan's implants immediately began analyzing the transmission for hidden codes, subliminal messages, or mimetic weapons. He found none. It was simply a young human sharing a story with an older one, both of them lost in a tale of adventure, friendship, and courage against impossible odds. But the effect on Nexari citizens was devastating. "Sir," Mira's voice cracked, "productivity in manufacturing Sector 7 has dropped by 60%. Workers are gathering in groups to share these ... stories. They're ignoring productivity quotas to discuss fictional characters and imaginary worlds. And mining Colony Delta? Complete work stoppage. They've organized something they call a book club. They're refusing to return to their posts until they finish reading about someone called Samwise Gamgee." Tan's mechanical fingers clenched. The Nexari had maintained order by keeping their citizens focused on work, consumption, and survival. Art, literature, and creative expression had been eliminated centuries ago as inefficient distractions. But these human stories were awakening something that had been dormant in his people imagination. "Deploy the neural dampeners," he ordered. "Full spectrum suppression." "Sir, we tried that in Sector 12. The citizens adapted. They're telling the stories from memory now, creating new versions, adding their own elements. The stories are ... evolving. For the first time in his 100-year reign, Overlord Tan felt something his cybernetic enhancements couldn't process: fear. Not of weapons or armies, but of something far more dangerous. The realization that his people had been living empty lives. A new transmission appeared on his displays. This time it was a group of humans gathered around what they called a campfire, taking turns telling stories. Their tales spoke of heroes who weren't stronger or smarter than everyone else, but who chose to do the right thing despite their fears. Of communities that came together in times of crisis. Of individuals who found meaning not in power or wealth, but in connection with others. "Sir," Myra whispered, her voice filled with wonder that her neural conditioning hadn't been able to suppress. "What if they're right? What if there's more to existence than efficiency and control?" Tan realized with growing horror that his own subordinates were being infected. The human stories weren't just entertainment, they were a virus of hope, spreading through his empire and showing his people possibilities they'd never been allowed to imagine. Across the hegemony, citizens were beginning to create their own stories, their own art, their own music. They were forming connections based on shared wonder rather than assigned functions. And with each passing hour, the rigid structure of his empire crumbled a little more. The humans had never fired a shot, never sent a single warship. They'd simply reminded an entire civilization what it meant to dream. Ambassador Kell of the Dominion Council believed in order above all else. His species, the Hierarchs, had spent 50,000 years perfecting their rigid caste system. Every individual knew their place, their function, their exact worth to society. It was efficient, predictable, and absolute, until the humans arrived with their chaos. The contamination has spread to 47 worlds, reported Castekeeper Rian, her voice tight with control. Lower castes are questioning their assignments. Mid-castes are refusing promotion, and the upper castes. She paused, struggling with words that had never been necessary before. Some are voluntarily reducing their status. Ambassador Kell's 4 hands moved in complex patterns, a gesture of deep contemplation that his people had practiced for millennia. Through the viewing ports of his command vessel, he could see his home world below. But instead of the orderly, light patterns that had marked Hierarch cities for generations, he saw something unprecedented: spontaneous gatherings. Crowds of citizens from different castes mingling freely. What specific human transmission caused this? He asked. Rian activated a holographic display. The image showed 2 humans, one clearly wealthy based on clothing and surroundings, the other obviously poor. But instead of the natural separation that should exist between different social levels, they sat together as equals, sharing what the humans called lunch. "This is Marcus," the wealthier human was saying. "He teaches children in one of the city's poorest districts. He's doing more to build our future than I ever will with all my money." The poorer human Marcus laughed with genuine joy. "And this is David. He funds 3 homeless shelters and 2 food banks, but he won't let anyone put his name on them. Says the work matters more than the credit." Kell's breathing apparatus fluttered with agitation. They mocked the natural order. Status exists for a reason. "Sir," Rian said carefully, "I've been monitoring the response from our population. They're not seeing mockery, they're seeing friendship." It was a word that barely existed in their language. Hierarchs formed alliances based on mutual benefit, partnerships based on compatible functions, and breeding arrangements based on genetic optimization. But friendship connection based purely on affection and shared experience was alien to their culture. "Show me more," Kell commanded, though every instinct told him to stop the flow of human transmissions immediately. The display filled with images, humans of different ages working together on projects, sharing knowledge across traditional boundaries. A elderly human teaching a child to paint, while a teenager helped an adult learn some complex mathematical concept. Scientists collaborating with artists. Leaders serving meals to the homeless. But what disturbed Kell most was a scene showing humans engaged in what they called civil disobedience. Citizens peacefully protesting unjust laws, standing together despite different backgrounds, risking personal harm for abstract principles like justice and equality. "They're showing our people that hierarchy can be challenged," Rian said. And Kell heard something in her voice he'd never noticed before: doubt. "You are Castekeeper Rian, Level 7, Administrative Function. Your thoughts on social order are irrelevant." "Are they?" she asked, and the question hung in the air like a weapon. Kell's world tilted. In 50,000 years, no lower caste had ever questioned their designation directly. It simply wasn't done. But Rian continued, "I've seen what happens when humans work together as equals. They accomplish impossible things. They create beauty. They solve problems that would stymie our most efficient hierarchies. Because they invite chaos." "No," Rian said, her voice growing stronger. "Because they invite everyone to contribute their best, not just their assigned function." Through his ship's sensors, Kell watched as members of his society's lowest castes, maintenance workers, began teaching advanced engineering concepts to middle castes. Knowledge that had been restricted for millennia was flowing freely. And impossibly, The systems they were designing together surpassed anything the upper castes had ever created. The humans weren't destroying the Dominion's order through force. They were showing his people that order imposed from above was less powerful than harmony chosen from within. That collaboration freely given produced better results than obedience demanded. As reports continued flowing in from across his territory, Kel realized that his people weren't becoming less capable. They were becoming more than anyone had ever imagined possible, and they had learned it all from humans who simply treated each other with respect. War Marshal Drac had built his reputation on understanding enemies. For 800 cycles, he had studied the psychology of conquest, the mathematics of battle, the precise application of violence to achieve political goals. He knew how to break armies, how to shatter alliances, how to turn populations against their own leaders, but he had never encountered anything like humanity's response to invasion. "They're doing it again," reported Battle Coordinator Vos Her. Frustration evident even through the translation matrix. Fleet Group Delta attempted to establish a blockade around their colony world. Instead of resistance, they invited us down for dinner. Drac's mandibles clicked in irritation. His species, the Devastators, had conquered 47 systems through superior firepower and tactical precision. When they arrived in human space, they had expected either immediate surrender or glorious battle. Instead, they had encountered something that defied all military logic. "Show me the transmission logs." The display filled with images from the attempted blockade. Human vessels had emerged from their planet's atmosphere, not warships, but converted civilian craft loaded with what their databases identified as care packages. Instead of weapons, they carried food, medical supplies, entertainment media, and personal messages. "Greetings," came the voice of a human female over the communication channel. "I'm Elena, and we know you've traveled a long way from home. We thought you might be hungry." "This is War Marshal Drac of the Devastator Fleet," his own voice responded. "From the recordings, you will surrender immediately or face annihilation." "Oh, we can't surrender," Elena had replied cheerfully. "We haven't done anything wrong. But you're welcome to join us for a meal while we talk about whatever brought you here." The humans had then proceeded to broadcast what they called a potluck dinner, hundreds of families sharing food and stories, welcoming complete strangers into their homes, treating the invasion fleet as though they were guests who had simply arrived unannounced. "What was our casualty assessment?" Drac asked. "None, sir. We suffered 0 casualties. I meant their casualties." Vos looked uncomfortable. "Also none, sir. We never fired." "Never fired?" Drac's voice rose to a roar. "Why?" "The troops said it would be like attacking during the ceasefire." The humans weren't showing any hostile intent. Drac accessed the personal logs from his soldiers. What he found there disturbed him more than any enemy strategy he'd ever encountered. His warriors, beings bred for conquest, were describing feelings they'd never experienced before. One veteran fighter had written, "They sent us recordings of their children singing. Not war songs or propaganda, just ... songs about friendship and hope. I listened to my translator struggle with concepts like unconditional love and forgiveness. How do you fight people who respond to threat with kindness?" Another entry read, "I've killed hundreds of enemies in glorious combat. But when that human mother offered to share pictures of her children with me, asked about my own family back home, I remembered why I originally fought, to protect the ones I love. How can I destroy someone else's family to achieve that?" "Sir," Vos interrupted his reading, "we're receiving reports from the occupation zones." "What occupation zones?" "We haven't successfully occupied anything. The human settlements, sir. Our troops they're helping with local construction projects, building schools, teaching combat techniques to human children as martial arts, sharing stories about home." Drac felt something crack in his chest, a sensation he'd never experienced before. His perfect war machine was dissolving not through defeat, but through something far more insidious: connection. The humans had somehow convinced his soldiers that strength was meant to protect, not dominate. That honor came from service, not conquest. That true warriors fought to create peace, not to perpetuate war. "Marshal," Voss said quietly, "I've been thinking about what the humans said. About their concept of defense. They don't seem to distinguish between protecting their own people and protecting anyone who needs protection. That's strategically nonsensical, is it? Their culture has survived longer than ours. They've never been conquered. And now our own troops are adopting their values without even realizing it." Through the viewing screen, Drac watched human children teaching his soldiers to play games he didn't recognize. Games that required cooperation rather than competition. Trust rather than dominance. His empire wasn't being destroyed by superior weapons or clever tactics. It was being transformed by the radical idea that former enemies could become friends, and that the strongest warriors were those who chose when not to fight. For the first time in his military career, War Marshal Drac found himself questioning whether conquest was actually victory. The Galactic Council had convened an emergency session for the first time in 3,000 years. Representatives from 6 major powers sat in the ancient chambers, their species differences temporarily set aside by a common crisis. "Let's review the facts," announced Counselor Prime Nex, their cybernetic voice echoing through the crystalline hall. "In the span of 37 standard days, humanity has encountered 6 galactic powers. No shots have been fired, no weapons deployed, no hostile actions taken by either side. Yet 4 empires have experienced complete governmental collapse. One has voluntarily dissolved its military, and the last has requested membership in something called a humanitarian alliance." Ambassador Threen of the Commerce Guild fluttered their wings nervously. "The economic implications are staggering. Trade routes that have existed for millennia are being reorganized around principles of fair exchange and mutual benefit. Profit margins across 17 sectors have plummeted because suppliers are refusing to exploit resource scarcity." "It's worse than economics," growled former War Marshal Drac, now serving as a military advisor. "My own soldiers have formed what they call peacekeeping units. They're using their combat training to protect civilian populations and resolve conflicts through mediation. They claim it's more challenging than warfare." Counselor Prime Nex's optical sensors focused on the central display, which showed a real-time map of human cultural spread. Like a slow-moving wave of light, human transmissions continued expanding through inhabited space, carrying their stories, their music, their impossible ideas about cooperation and dignity. "Perhaps," suggested Admiral Kess of the Maritime Coalition, "we should study their military capabilities. Surely they possess some form of advanced warfare technology." The display shifted to show human military installations. The assembled representatives leaned forward, expecting to see superweapons or massive defense networks. Instead, they saw something puzzling: humans in uniform working alongside former enemies to build hospitals, teach literacy, and develop sustainable farming techniques. "I don't understand," admitted Counselor Vran. "Where are their weapons of conquest?" A new voice entered the chamber, transmitted from a human vessel that had appeared, uninvited and unannounced, at the edge of their system. The familiar face of Captain Reed filled the display. "Counselors," she said with that characteristic human warmth, "we've been monitoring your discussion. We thought you might have questions." "Human," Nex's voice carried the weight of ancient authority. "Explain your strategy. How do you conquer without conquest? How do you win without fighting?" Captain Reed smiled sadly. "We don't win, Counselor. We share." "Share what?" "Everything that makes us human. Our failures, our hopes, our discoveries about what makes life worth living. We learned long ago that the strongest civilizations aren't built on control or fear. They're built on connections between people who choose to care about each other. But surely you must want something, insisted Threen. Territory, resources, strategic advantage? We want what every thinking being wants, Reed replied. We want to know we're not alone in the universe. We want to learn from other cultures. We want to help solve problems that are too big for any one species to handle alone. We want to ensure that our children, all our children, human and non-human alike, inherit a galaxy worth living in. The chamber fell silent. These concepts weren't foreign to the assembled species, but they had been considered idealistic, impractical, or naive. Seeing them in action, watching entire empires transform through exposure to human culture, forced a different perspective. You're offering alliance without subjugation, said former Admiral Vex, who had arrived as an observer. Partnership without dominance. We're offering friendship, Reed corrected gently. Everything else grows from that. As the session continued, the representatives found themselves discussing possibilities they'd never considered. Joint scientific endeavors, cultural exchange programs, cooperative exploration of uncharted space. Instead of debating territorial boundaries, they began planning shared projects. Humanity had done something unprecedented in galactic history. Without firing a single shot, they had shown entire civilizations that there was an alternative to endless cycles of conquest and domination. They had proven that strength could be measured not by what you could take, but by what you chose to give, and in doing so, they had begun the transformation of a galaxy ruled by fear into one founded on hope. The empires had fallen in days, not because they were weak, but because they had finally been shown something worth building instead.